Hi guys! I don't think it's a secret for everyone that every person on this planet is free to choose how to live their life. However, some people only dream of adventures, all the while letting grass grow under their feet. But there are also those who make their own fate. It's true that most people want to leave something behind, something they will be remembered for. Unfortunately, only a few people actually manage to achieve this. I think that's why the story of an ordinary Englishman, which dates back to 1962, has left an indelible mark. So what is it that happened 58 years ago? That's what I'm going to tell you about today. A man named Brandon Grimshaw worked as an editor in a London newspaper. And like millions of other people around the world, he could only dream of having a successful career. Well, he might have actually had one, if it wasn't for an incredible incident that changed his whole life. As is often the case, it all happened by a complete coincidence. At one of the work events, a random 10-year-old boy asked Brandon jokingly if he wanted to live on a deserted island, to which the man also jokingly replied, "Why not?" Asked and answered, it would seem, but not really. On that rainy night, Brandon couldn't fall asleep. The boy's question was whirling in his head. The man was looking at his entire life and was thinking about what would come next. He wasn't a young boy anymore, but an almost 40-year-old bachelor. He never managed to buy his own place, and his prospects were very humble, as Brandon would later open up. In fact, there was nothing holding him back from changing his whole life. And just then, he got an idea. Some may call him crazy, but a few days later, Brandon began the search for a small island. Sure, he didn't have a high income, but he had some money, which he'd been saving up all his life to buy an apartment. Soon, he decided to quit everything. His job, his friends and connections, everything he had to show for the 40 years of his life. He invested all the money he had saved up in an adventure. He chose a small Seychelles island called Moyen, located 4.5 kilometers north of the island of Mehi. It was 480 meters long and 300 meters wide. We should say that buying this island cost the man 8,000 pounds, or a little under $13,000. The 40-year-old man was satisfied with the price, so in just a few days, he bought the 9-hectare plot of land, where no human has set foot in years, and moved there for good. It's also worth mentioning that the Seychelles archipelago includes 115 islands, and only 33 of which are inhabited. It's a popular tourist destination, with luxury hotels and all the benefits of civilization. Some islands are owned by billionaires, but back then, one could buy a small piece of land for a very affordable amount, which is exactly what Brandon did. The man didn't mind moving to the other end of the world because he had already traveled to Africa and a long journey didn't scare him. When Brandon bought Moyen Island, it was so overgrown that there was literally no place for a coconut to fall to the ground. Jumping ahead, let me just say that many years later, thanks to his tireless work, he did manage to bring it to order. He arrived at the island with only 2 bags in his hands and faced all the challenges that Robinson did and most of us have only seen on TV. He built a small wooden house, and the stuff he brought with him was enough to last for the first year. Little by little, Brandon began to transform the wild island, and a year later, he found an assistant, Rien Lefortune, a local man who used to live on one of the neighboring inhabited islands. Rien helped Brandon make the island habitable, get food, take care of birds and turtles, and plant trees. Time flew by. In the decades they spent on the island, they planted about 6,000 trees, thus giving home to about several thousand birds. It might seem like an easy thing to do, but it's much easier said than done. The first time Brandon attracted birds from another island, they flew back home right away. He did it again and again, until one day, a couple of birds returned to the new island and settled there. Our Robinson began to feed them, and over time, more and more birds came to live on his island. A few years later, there were several thousands of birds. In 10 years' time, they built about 5 kilometers of paths and created conditions good enough for a person to live a long and, more importantly, a happy life there. As hard as it might be to believe, while Rien was commuting between the island and his home, Brandon lived there for decades without ever leaving it. The story of the modern-day Robinson Crusoe quickly spread around the world, and the man became so popular that journalists lined up to interview him. And even though he never declined an interview, he didn't do it for fame or out of vanity, but out of love for his little piece of land, which he poured his soul into. In 1996, after almost 40 years of life on the island, Brandon Grimshaw's autobiography was published, A Grain of Sand, the story of one man and an island. In 2007, Reen LaFortune, Grimshaw's only assistant and close friend, died of cancer, just a few years after he became Brandon's adopted son. So our Robinson was left on the island all alone. The 81-year-old man managed to attract 2,000 of new species of birds to the island and bred over 100 giant turtles, which were on the verge of extinction. Thanks to Grimshaw's efforts, the once deserted island now hosts 2/3 of the Seychelles fauna. This way, an abandoned piece of land turned into a real garden of paradise. And there's more to it. In 2010, the Prince of Saudi Arabia even offered Brandon Grimshaw an unbelievable amount of $50 million for the island. He wanted to build a magnificent resort there, but guess what our Robinson replied? Of course, he rejected the offer. I don't want it to be a vacation spot for the rich and famous. I'd rather see it become a national park that everyone can enjoy. Journalists once asked Brandon if he ever felt lonely, and his answer was very surprising. Yes, Brandon said. Of course I felt lonely, but that was when I used to rent an apartment in London. Over time, electricity and phone cables were installed on the island. Brandon's efforts brought the island the status of a national park, Moyena Island National Park. It has more species per square meter than any other place does. Moyena is open to tourists, but only for a brief tour without an overnight stay. The entrance fee is only €12, beach time and lunch included. All the profit is invested into the island's development. No matter what others may think, Brandon Grimshaw lived a happy life, and he lived it the way he wanted to. The modern-day Robinson Crusoe passed away in 2012. He used to say that if he could have a few more lives, then he would spend all of them on his island, because he didn't regret anything. Brandon Grimshaw became popular all over the world. In addition to a restaurant, his island now has a small museum and a chapel that has a board with the names of all of the island owners since 1850 engraved on it. There's also a small cemetery with 3 graves. Grimshaw's father and 2 unknown pirates are buried there. So, this was a story of an ordinary man who realized that he wanted to change his life when he was 40 years old, which he did successfully. So friends, do you think you can do what Brandon did? Would you be willing to give up the benefits of civilization, the internet, and other comforts to move to a deserted island? Be sure to write about it in the comments. And that's it for today. Rate our video if you liked it, and see you soon. Bye.